Kindiki, wadhifa uliotanguliwa na miaka miwili ya usimamizi tata kwenye Wizara ya Usalama na Masuala ya Ndani ya Nchi. Hii leo kwenye mkao wake wa kwanza kama naibu rais atakuwa anawaelezea Wakenya kuhusu wadhifa wake mpya pamoja na agenda za serikali. Mimi ni Mashirima Kapombe kutoka runinga ya Citizen, lakini niko na wenzangu kutoka mashirika mbalimbali ya habari.
My name is Joel Chacha from K24 TV.
My name is Michelle Ngele Odhiambo from NTV.
And I am John Jacob Kuria from the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation.
I am Ashley Mazuri from KTN.
Good evening, I'm George Maringa from Cape Media Limited, TV47.
Karibu Professor, na asante sana kwa muda wako. This interview will be conducted in both English and Kiswahili, so feel free to express yourself in the language that you feel most comfortable. Now let's start with the elephant in the room. When we publicized this interview, some of the reactions that we received were quite hostile on your person. And I'll read some of those responses that we got. One said, cancel that interview. Another one said, not worth my time. Another one called you a butcher and a murderer. Another said, who killed protesters under his leadership? Now, why would this interview generate so much hostility on your person? And why do you think Kenyans feel tonight whatever you have to say is not of value to them?
First, I appreciate and thank you for having me on this broadcast. It is, maybe I'll start by saying that not everyone is saying what you read out. There are others who are saying other things. But that is still okay because it is the right of the people of Kenya to express themselves on what they think about their leaders, especially political leaders. And therefore, mine is to confirm that because I've been in public life for a while, in various capacities, I have endeavored to do my best to my country. And I have no regret for anything. Maybe lessons learned, which is a common human thing that perhaps there are things I've picked along the way. But in terms of my public duty and commitment to our national interest, I have been extremely clear on what is expected of me in the various roles that I have played in this country.
As Interior CS, where Kenyans feel that you oversaw massive brutality on Kenyans who are expressing themselves when they felt that their leaders were not representing them in the way that they should, do you take personal responsibility for the murder of 60 people according to the KNCHR?
Well, the violent protest that took place early this year and even earlier on in 2023 unfortunately led to loss of lives. Some of those lives were lost in various ways, including through police action. I have no reason to take responsibility for anything because the space of violence and encounter with law enforcement is a space which is defined by law. And the role of the Minister for Interior is defined in the Constitution, Article 245, on what that role is. That role includes providing policy guidance to the organs of internal security. The role of police operations are protected through the mandate of independent command of the Inspector General, and therefore police operations, especially in engaging protesters or people who are seen as breaching the peace, is the province for the independent command of the National Inspector General of the National Police Service, as far as I'm concerned, the 2 years I have been the country's interior minister, every single day of them, when I woke up to do my work, to make sure that the security organs of our country that protect our country from threats, security threats, perform their work, and should they require any policy guidance, that guidance is provided. And that's all what I can say for now.
So you're saying tonight that you have no say whatsoever when the police misbehave?
The Interior Minister has no role in police operations, according to Article 245.
So you have no say whatsoever when they go wrong? As a professor of law?
I have a say, and I said it. And the say is this, that police officers are allowed to use force, including lethal force, in exceptional circumstances. Should any officer violate the strict parameters of those circumstances, they are accountable under the law. And we say it many times, not once, not even in the context of the protest alone, but also in the context of the fight against terror and the fight against banditry and other organized crime. That any police officer who uses their firearm lawfully within the Constitution, including lethal force, has legal protection. But any of them who exceeds the parameters of the Constitution is on their own, and the organs of accountability is not the Interior Minister. It is the agencies such as IPOA and the DPP and the rest.
So who shot at David Chege at the precincts of Parliament and Erickson Chalo Mutisia? These two young men were not armed. Would you say that use of live ammunition was reasonable?
I think the matter of the violence that occurred in Parliament and the unfortunate loss of life is a matter that which is actively being investigated by IPOA and other agencies. So it will be preemptive for me to tell you who shot the two Kenyans who unfortunately, according to the records, lost their lives in that context.
So how far are the investigations? You're the DP now. You may have moved on to a different role, but it's definitely senior to...
I'm aware that there are two ways of conducting investigations. One is through the internal affairs unit of the police. But our policy in the last 2 years, while we were in that docket, we discouraged the internal affairs unit of the police from being the ones to investigate their colleagues, because it raises issues of conflict of interest, and perhaps perceptions of bias. So we encourage the Independent Police Oversight Authority to be the one to do the investigations. The report I had when I left the ministry is that they had made some good progress. They reported to me they had some 6 files which are ready from the context of the riots and the violence around that time. But there has been a transition in the leadership of IPOA right now. A new commission has just been put in place, and the work of IPOA is led by commissioners. It's not led by the Secretariat. So the delay in the last 2-3 months could be associated to the leadership transition by IPOA.
Ashley and George, you have follow-ups. Ashley?
All right, Your Excellency, you have made a name for yourself as a defender of human rights. Are you proud about the events that occurred in June this year? I mean, this led to deaths of young, innocent Kenyans. Where does this sit as, to you, the professor of human rights, not as the deputy president, but as the professor of human rights?
Any Kenyan, not to mention a professor of law, who would be proud by what happened in our country June, July, from whatever angle, would be inappropriately doing so. Because those events were extremely painful to the country. They were unnecessary, if I may say so. because there is a way of processing democratic encounters, and there's a way in which the balances between the protection of public safety and the expression of individual rights and freedoms must help us navigate peaceful and orderly society. So to answer your question, I wouldn't be proud at all.
Mr. Deputy President, then what did you have to say to families who are still looking for their loved ones? For instance, on X, we were tagged and someone said, I always communicate with Peter Masharia's mom. Imagine she wakes up every day to go to the mortuary. Peter Masharia went missing on the 25th of June. Tonight, what do you tell those families that are still looking for their loved ones?
To the families who lost their loved ones or whose loved ones are still missing, I would say that it's unfortunate that this country went through what it went through in June, July. I hope that our country has learned the lessons and we will not get there again, because losing a loved one, having a loved one missing for months, almost half a year, even for a day, is extremely painful. And therefore, as I said when I responded to this matter earlier on, maybe not on this forum, it is very unfortunate, and we, including myself, are there again.
Yet when they look at you, Professor, they say you are the face of, disappearances, abductions, deaths and murders on young people in this country. Do you feel that you're struggling to shake off that tag?
Not at all,
okay,
because it is not true. So I don't struggle at all.
So then,
Your Excellency, the families that were bereaved pleaded with the government of the day to help them with burial expenses. Did that happen? How much was spent? And there was a committal to compensate families that lost their beloved ones. What's the status of that, Deputy President?
To the best of my knowledge, a number of families were given modest ex gratia support on a request basis and on a basis of confidentiality, because what the state does in a situation like that, when there is distress in the country, citizens are facing distress, we go out of our way for ways of supporting. But normally that support is support which, first of all, is not budgeted for, so we have to look for ways of, within the security budget, absorbing some of those costs. And if I recall well, a number of families were supported on an ex gratia basis. The question of compensation is a little more complex and will require guidance, because no law would allow expenditure on compensation for events similar to what we had. I am aware, even in more extreme cases like terrorist-related deaths and injury, it is anticipated that victims of terrorist crimes and other violent acts would be compensated. And I think when we left the ministry, we were trying to develop regulations on the operationalization of Section 49 of the Prevention of Terrorism Act. I think that can form a basis of thinking of how else or in which other circumstances perhaps extreme cases of loss and injury could be compensated. So that's a discussion we are having, and I'm more than willing to follow up. Even in my new role, nothing prevents me from following up and ensuring that in justifiable cases which are defined by law, where injury or loss happens and the law allows, then compensation can ensue.
So this evening you're telling Kenyans that the bereaved families will have to wait longer until the law is developed, and I'm not actually asking for specific families. These are public resources for purposes of accountability. Once again, how much was spent to settle the burial expenses?
I wouldn't know, because it's not, you know, there's no vote called burial expenses. There's no vote like that. So this is ex gratia support, not just for these cases, many other cases every day that the state deals with are done ex gratia within the security operations budget, and therefore it's not possible to pinpoint. This amount was used for burial because of the lack of a specific vote line.
On the time frame for compensation?
What about?
What time can they wait? For how long can the law be developed?
I am not sure, but we will do our best to make sure that cases where we form consensus, national consensus that require compensation are onboarded, because even in the extreme and glaring cases of terrorism, I've told you, it has taken, I think now, quite a number of years since we enacted the Prevention of Terrorism Act to operationalize that section. So I'm hoping perhaps within the year, within the coming year, we can work with the new leadership in that ministry and other stakeholders in the normal way government works and process perhaps regulations of the operationalization of some of these issues as to whether that can be expanded beyond terrorism-related incidents. That is a discussion again which we can open up to stakeholder input and have it dealt with.
It's clear, Mr. Deputy President, that the tag behind you, and you know, my colleague Mashima Kapombe mentioned it when we mentioned that we were having this interview, is not a very rosy one. And one person in particular called you the butcher of Tharaka. I have two important questions I'd like to understand. Because President William Ruto addressed the nation on the night of June 25th when protesters breached Parliament. He told the nation that that was a treasonous act perpetrated by crooks and criminals. Do you believe that the young people killed by police during the protest were crooks and criminals and not young people trying to advocate for their rights?
The protests of June started as legitimate protests by peaceful Kenyans who were expressing their rights and opinions on certain issues that they felt that needed to be handled by government differently. In the course of those protests, criminal elements infiltrated those protests, and it became very difficult. On the one hand, you have protesters whose interest is just expressing themselves within the Constitution, but within their midst, there are people killing people, hurting people, looting property, and that's how Parliament was breached, because protesting does not include breaching in Parliament, which is a restricted access facility. And that day, we came very short of the burning down of Parliament. And in the process, the chambers of the Chief Justice were also vandalized by protesters, broke the wall, broke windows and doors, and stole water and other items. So the point is, how do we balance going forward? They need to protect the right to protest, but at the same time ensure public safety. Other countries have had their occasions, like the Americans had on 6th January 2020. Similar situation. People are unhappy with an election outcome, and they just venture into constitutional institutions and run amok and bring violence. So it is unfortunate we had that mix-up between honest, legitimate protesters and cruel and dangerous criminals who really caused a lot of pain, death, destruction, and almost put down some of our institutions established under the Constitution.
There's been many questions over who gave the shoot-to-kill order. Was there a shoot-to-kill order? And was it a show of culpability for security agencies under your command that warranted the presence of the military, the Kenya Defense Forces, to quell the situation?
There was no shoot to kill order. And the Interior Minister does not command the operations of the police. This is spelled out in Article 245 of the Constitution in very clear terms.
If there was...
Your Excellency, I want to put this question to you, and it's a question of responsibility. When you're being vetted for the second time as the Cabinet Secretary Interior, there was a lot of praise heaped on you for combating banditry in the north of Kenya. And you appeared to acknowledge that. Was the police in the North Rift under different command, so much so that when it comes to the Gen Z protests, you're not the one in charge, but when it comes to the North Rift, you will take the glory?
At no time have I said I've been in charge of the operations on banditry, because the Minister for Interior does not play that role. Have I provided it policy leadership to deal with banditry in the last 2 years? The answer is yes, in a very consequential manner, with great humility, because other than advising on the establishment of the Operation Maliza Uhalifu and the gazettement of the disturbed areas. You know, that's the job now of the minister. Those are policy interventions. But I was able to push through in a very difficult financial situation prevailing then in the country, an injection of a significant amount of resources to acquire equipment to assist the police in their operations, which has been the missing link for many years. MRAPs, that is the mine resistance ambush protected vehicles, armored personnel carriers, drones, that is the aerial vehicles, aerial unmanned aerial vehicles, and so many other, including personal protection items. So, in a very modest way, I would want to be associated with the tremendous work done by the police, with the support of the military, to dismantle the infrastructure of banditry in the North Rift, because I provided policy support for the acquisition of modern weapons and also providing the legal space for the police to carry out operations, especially in the areas which I classified as disturbed and dangerous, because that is where criminals were always retreating and regrouping. Those areas today are completely free from bandits.
The question here, Your Excellency, is on the question of responsibility. Local NGOs, the United Nations, the US government, the foreign missions have admonished the government of the Republic of Kenya of its human rights record, and particularly the handling of a Gen Z protests. My question to you tonight is, when the Republic of Kenya is being admonished, who takes responsibility?
Well, as I have said, you see, the general admonition or viewpoints by various stakeholders on the performance of government on many things, including homeland security, is a legitimate thing. But the question of responsibility arises when one believes that there is something they have done wrong. It doesn't arise when someone's conscience is crystal clear. They have not done anything wrong. From where I sit, the nearly 700 days I served as Kenya's Interior Minister, one, I can account for each of those days what I did for this country, sometimes under great distress and risk, which I knew I'm exposing myself, but because of duty, I had to do it. Some of the places I did, my predecessors never ventured into them. I spent nights in police barracks and military barracks with frontline soldiers, not to command them, but to give them moral support, including on Christmas Day, including on Easter, places like Lamu, where terror attacks were the order of the day, to give them support that the government has not sent these officers there to die. They have sent them there to protect the nation. And as minister, my moral support and the policy guidance I gave, I think, was instrumental in a big way because of the feedback I have received from the officers. So to answer your question, therefore, I am not saying that our homeland security system is perfect. It is work in progress. But responsibility is individual. It's not collective.
I must remind you, Prof, and the viewers, that there's a lot of rain here, so we'll have to speak a bit louder so that we can be heard. But as you speak about policy guidelines and taking modest credit for what was done in the North Rift on banditry, are you trying to tell us that you could not give policy guidelines on how police protests or moral support in them ensuring that they adhere to human rights?
We did.
So what happened? What went wrong?
What went wrong is what goes wrong when maybe, the operations, security operations are intense and emotive operations. It's not somewhere where an officer will be told, when you reach there, do this, do the other. So what we have are general policy guidelines. For example, the use of labor force is reserved when to apply when the life of the officer is at risk.
So was any officer's life in danger? Allow me, Professor Kindiki, was any police officer in danger when David Shege and Enoch Chalo, Erickson Chalo Mutisia only had a flag and they were dancing outside Parliament? What threat did they pose to security officers at Parliament?
That is the matter under investigations. If the circumstances you're reading out there is what happened, the officers will be accountable. It's as simple as that.
And how long will that take?
As soon as IPOA completes the investigations and forwards the files to the DPP. Criminal investigations are complex. They involve scientific assembling of evidence. It is not enough to rush suspects to court only for cases to collapse. And it is not uniquely a Kenyan issue. Criminal investigations, especially in a complex endeavor like the situation we're referring them to, take a bit of time, and therefore I'm hopeful that...
Why were the police in mass? How complex was that? That we again, who was ensuring security is not breached?
You're just telling me what you think or saw.
But it was
which is part of evidence.
It was on live TV. There are photos of police officers who are masked.
I
can't identify them.
I'm not disputing.
But
just telling
as the
you,
CS Interior,
that is part of the evidence that is required to hold into account any person who may have been involved in that unfortunate incident you're explaining.
Your Excellency, if you were to move this forward and probably look at why the public is on you, this is what you said on the 12th anniversary of the Supreme Court about a month ago. And you were talking about crucial jurisprudence. You said, I have had to ask myself whether the highest interest is the public interest or there is a higher interest called the national interest, because the public itself could hurt the national interest. Public can be mobilized or mobilize themselves against national interest. First of all, where does this national interest sit in the Constitution? And number two, wasn't this an indirect proposal of a clawback on basic freedoms that are enshrined in the Constitution, Your Excellency?
As you answer this, Your Excellency, you did say that lives of protesters need to be protected as you ensure public safety. Was the public unsafe during that period? Why did we get to that point?
When I spoke at the Supreme Court reflection colloquium on public interest and national interest, some erroneously thought I was talking about government interest or even security interest. That's not the case. In fact, after that colloquium, I've had further reflection, because by the grace of God, I'm also a scholar. So I reflect on some of these things, and I have come to the conclusion that within our constitutional framework, we can categorize 3 forms of interest that could be expressed by members of the public, rather than 2, 3. One is popular interest. And the question I'm asking myself as a scholar and a student of constitutional law is whether what is popular is in the public interest all the time. I am not sure. I am not sure that what is popular is in the public interest. I don't believe. Sometimes yes, maybe not all the times. But at the Supreme Court colloquium, I also asked, is there a hierarchy of norms in our Constitution such that we have public interest and national interest? And for clarity and avoidance of doubt, national interest is not government interest, and it's not the interest of, it's not security. What I had in mind is, you're aware, our Constitution allows the people of Kenya to express themselves in exercise of their sovereignty in 2 ways. 1, through elections. 2, through referenda. And then I asked myself, in fact it was tailored to the judiciary, and I wanted to ask myself, if the people of Kenya, for example, agree and express themselves in exercise of their sovereignty to change the Constitution in a referendum and vote to remove the judicial arm of government, and they decide we don't need the judiciary. People are sovereign. In a referendum, they can actually remove the judiciary. And then I ask myself, since this is an outcome of a referendum, this is in the public interest. But is it in the national interest that really you can have a modern country, a democratic country without a judicial arm of government?
But these are 2 different scenarios, DP, because this was about taxes that Kenyans felt were unfair, and their leaders
at the
were
Supreme
not
Court,
listening to
I
them.
was not talking about the protest at all. You can look at my statements. I was not talking about protest.
So what do you...
We were reflecting on what the Supreme Court has helped us to understand about our Constitution, and I was inviting the Supreme Court judges to start thinking whether, even as we express our sovereignty, we have what we call bedrock things that we cannot touch. I'll give you another example. If the people of Kenya meet and in a referendum, they overwhelmingly vote, so it is popular, it is in public interest, and they vote to change Article 4.2 of the Constitution that says that Kenya is a democratic multi-party state and create a monarchy or another form of government that is not democracy. It is in the public interest. It is popular. It's in the popular interest. But is it in the national interest? My answer is that it is not. So within the Constitution, there are things you can change and still not change the DNA of our Constitution. There are others, once you touch them, the DNA of Kenya as we know it changes forever. That's what I was discussing.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that, Your Excellency, because during your vetting, following your reappointment as Interior Cabinet Secretary, you are on record saying that you will specify designated protest areas, potentially undermining the right to peaceful assembly outlined in Article 37 of the Constitution. How would you justify limiting spaces where Kenyans can express their grievances at a time when the government is facing mounting criticism, and why?
That is the practice in all democracies. Show me one democracy where people are free to express themselves anywhere, anyhow, anytime, notwithstanding the rights of other people, including traffic the right for traffic to flow, and so forth. I have been, before I became minister, I was an academic. And for about 12 years, I traveled to about 100 countries around the world. So I'm very familiar with many democracies. Many of them, including the Hague, where I spent almost 7 years in the International Criminal Court trials. They designate places where you go and express yourself. Every institution actually is mandated. If it's parliament, they designate a place, and then the police gives some routine. They say between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m., a certain group will protest. And they tell the police will be about 500 and so forth. And then you protest there, you hand your petition, someone comes and receives petitions, then you vacate. Maybe in the evening another group will come. That's what we might start thinking about. But as long as we think that expression of rights means you venture and frustrate everybody else who is not part of your protest, then we are courting anarchy, and that's not part of democracy.
And peaceful protest, because even when, if you go to Chacha, even when you saw the protests regarding the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, they were just roughed off by police. One even wonders, because you even have had leaders who have expressed a fear and concern that actually it's not even Kenyan police. So who are these that appear when Kenyans exercise the democratic freedom of picketing?
The example you have given was regrettable, and government has already addressed itself to that issue. The Principal Secretary for State Department for Internal Security did.
Don't you think the precedences are too many?
Not really, I don't think so. And I think with the apology that the State Department gave, I think Kenyans should give government the benefit of doubt. Mm-hmm. Because if the intention was to keep on doing this thing, then an apology was unnecessary. If you know you're going to do it again, you just keep quiet and do it the following day.
Did you realize this only when you became the interior boss? And despite having served in various capacities in the leadership of the Senate, you didn't think of introducing that bill then?
In 2015, I introduced the Homeland Security Bill, which, as leader of majority in the Senate, which was taken up and became part of it, is what became the miscellaneous security laws of 2014. I know some parts of that law were struck out, but 85% of those laws are what has made Kenya.
Specifically on limiting the protesters?
The security laws did not cover the issue of protest. But it covered a wide range of issues that we needed to deal with to make sure that our country is safe. But on the other hand, legislation is work in progress. It doesn't end with one piece of legislation. It happens every day. Democracies which have been in place for 300 years are still making law, even security-related laws. So I did my bit in certain aspects, as in the example I've given you, but it is not true that when somebody serves as a member of parliament or senate, everything that needs to be legislated will be done during that time.
DP, as we wrap this topic up, there's one question that many Kenyans would like to know. In a Citizen TV interview after the protests, you said that infiltrators were linked to elements within government and opposition. And you said we have evidence leading to political operatives from across the political divide. We will prosecute. How far are we with that? How many of those planners or operatives?
Last time I checked, I've been following up after that, and you know that's not too long ago. That was July. After that, as you're aware, the cabinet was dissolved, the entire cabinet. For that period around August, there was no cabinet. July, August, and then September, the vetting. So by the time I went back to the ministry, it was sometimes, I think, August, October, I can't remember the date. And we are following up on that process. As much as I know, a number of people have already recorded statements, and as far as I know, a file was forwarded by the DCI to the DPP, but it was returned to seal certain gaps that have been discovered by the DPP, and therefore that is work in progress. As I said, criminal investigations take long, but I'm sure there will be accountability for everyone who may have either incited violence or taken advantage of the peaceful protest to infiltrate that democratic process.
But you said you have evidence. Why should it take long? Or is it only a preserve of the political class?
That evidence, I have just told you that it was presented to the DPP, and the DPP said it was not enough to convict. You can have evidence which is not enough to convict. I could believe, okay, that the evidence is enough, but the DPP, who has the final say in qualitative and quantitative evidence, is the one who has the police to do more work if we have to sustain prosecution.
So the police didn't do a very good job, that's what you're saying, in the investigation?
This is routine, it happens every day, not just in Kenya, all over the world. The police do their work, and that's why there's that two-tier mechanism. So the DPP looks at it and said, no, we need to fill this using the elements of crime, you need the evidence of this. So we cannot say the police didn't do a good job. It happens every day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'd like to move to the next topic, which is your ascension to power as the Deputy President and the politics around it. And this session will be led by Ashwin Mazuri.
All right, Your Excellency, did you play a role in Rigathi Gachagwa's ouster?
No.
Then are you proud of the process, the impeachment process that many said were flawed that led to your ascension to power as the Deputy President?
The process you are referring to, I think, involved three arms of government: the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature. To that extent, to the extent that constitutional institutions were involved and are still involved, I see no problem with that process, and if there is a problem, there is a way of remedying that problem.
What about the right to fair hearing that he did not get?
That is the matter before court, unless you want me to discuss the merits of the matter before court.
So then what's your relationship between you and the ousted, impeached Deputy President?
As it was before.
Are you friends or not?
We are good people, we're good friends. I have no reason to complain in the past, present, and even in the future.
Was there a handover?
Yes.
An official handover?
Was there an official handover?
There wasn't an official handover because the former Deputy President is in court. You wouldn't expect him to hand over if he's in court.
Your Excellency, which IEBC cleared you? Did you take your papers there? How were you cleared by the IEBC?
There's no requirement to clear a Deputy President who ascends to office by virtue of Article 145 read together with 150.
But the
What requires the clearance of IBC is the President and the Deputy President in an election.
The President's
So yours
memo
was
to
different.
Parliament, Your Excellency, indicated that
There was no
nomination
election.
was cleared by IEBC.
There was no election. I assumed office through a process different from a process following an election.
Is it an indictment of the judiciary, Your Excellency? Because the former Deputy President, through a court process, is actually outside. We have the governor of Meru, who is in office, even through a similar process. What kind of jurisprudence is that creates two forms of justice in your own understanding? And this is from a point of view as a law professor.
First, the two cases you have cited were beneficiaries of court injunctions. The only difference is in one, after the inter partes hearing of the matter around whether or not the injunction should be preserved. In one case, the court found that the injunction needed to be lifted. In the second case, which also there has been an injunction, the court found yesterday that there is no need to lift the injunction. That's the only difference. And it happens in courts all the time, not just in Kenya, all over the world. In fact, the finding of one court is in many cases overturned by the next court the following day. So there is no inconsistency whatsoever. Mm-hmm. That is judicial practice. A judge, even one bench of 3 judges, one judge will say this, 2 other judges will say different things, on the same subject matter, same articles, same evidence, same parties. That's how, that's the independence of the judiciary is not just institutional. It is individual, it's decisional. Every judge carries decisional independence.
Your predecessor, Your Excellency, says the reason you ascended to this position is because you are a yes man. You cannot mount any challenge whatsoever to the president. I'm putting this question to you tonight. Are you your own man? Are you a yes man?
I am my own man. On the second issue, I would like to respond as follows. My understanding of the role of the deputy president is not to challenge the president. It is not in the constitution. It is not in any law. It is not in any practice. That is not the job description of the deputy president. As to whether the deputy president can advise the president, the answer is yes. The oath of office I took has a clause that asks me to faithfully advise the president when my advice is sought.
So then where does your allegiance lie? To the people or your appointing authority?
My allegiance lies on the oath of office I took. You look at the oath of office, it will tell you where my allegiance is.
And are you proud of the
people of Kenya, to the nation and the national interest? And when my counsel is sought by the president, I must give it faithfully. And faithfully doesn't mean that I do it on the podium.
Does it?
But it means I have to be faithful, and faithfully means it could be different from what the president thinks.
DP, are you proud of the manner in which you became deputy president? In 2022, you were a front runner to be running mate to Dr. William Ruto, but you did not get that position. And you actually said you were going to take a break from politics. Are you now proud that 2 years down the line, you are the one who has taken that position after the impeachment on the person who was picked over you?
I have no regrets for my occupying this space because I have no reason to regret. It is true I was a front runner to be deputy president in 2022 through a process that was conducted by my party. I was not successful. My brother, Rigathi Gachagua, was successful. I congratulated him, and I said 2 things. One, that I will support the campaign, the presidential campaign, until 8th or 9th of August 2022. And after that, I will take a break from elective and appointive positions.
But you still took the CS
Just a moment.
position.
Just a moment. After I made those 2 very important decisions, which I made after soul searching and consulting everyone who needed to be consulted, my party and its leadership met and persuaded me as a member of the party, because I didn't say I'll leave the party. I said I'll campaign for President Ruto and his deputy, but after that I'll not be running for any office. I'll take a break for 10 years. And therefore, the party met and persuaded me to change my mind and accept an appointive position as Minister for Interior, which I accepted. That's all.
Are you the kingpin of the Mount Kenya region?
Which office is that?
Of course, you are endorsed.
You are endorsed by a section of members from majorly the East, where you hail from. You never dismissed that.
Which office is that?
Your Excellency, other than the kingpin issue, there are a majority of members of parliament who met in Nanyuki from the Mount Kenya region, that is before you ascended to the office of Deputy President, and endorsed yourself as their link in government.
To the executive.
You have ascended to that office now. Are you now, have you ceased being their link?
Maybe you should ask them. Because I think the members of parliament, because I didn't say it, they said it. So maybe they can say it again if they wish, but to the best of my recollection, those members of parliament had expressed frustrations in getting their constituency development agenda through to government because of the breakdown of relationship they had with the former occupier of this office. And therefore, they asked me whether I could convey their needs to the president. And because I was a member of the cabinet, I saw no problem with that. But whether or not they would continue asking me to convey their messages, it's up to them to decide.
You come from that region. Sorry, you come from that region, the Mount Kenya region. Tharaka-Nithi, where you come from, is nestled in Mount Kenya region. I want to know, because Kenya Kwanza had promises it made towards the people of that region. So who will be pushing for the implementation of these promises?
That region, like other regions in Kenya, has very many elected leaders. The office I occupy now as Deputy President is an office of the Republic. Unlike other leaders, for example, who have a subnational mandate. And therefore, the way I see it is that the people from the region you're referring to, which happens to be where I was born and raised, have a right, just like the people from the coast, Western, Nyanza, Rift Valley, Northeastern. They have a right to use this office, because it's a national office, to channel their needs, interest to the government. So I see no contradiction, I see no change of position, and the only thing I don't understand is this thing about the kingpin or something. I don't understand it because there is no office like that.
Well, and are you still hopeful, and do you think there is a possibility of you becoming William Ruto's running mate come 2027?
How would I know?
Your Excellency, then you've talked about development and, those members of parliament using this office to lobby for development. Shouldn't then the development be a democratic right so that then there is no need to lobby and to push for it?
That's not true. The reason you have subnational representation of political leaders, members of the National Assembly, members of the Senate, their mandate is subnational. A member of the National Assembly represents the interests, priorities of the constituency where they are elected. Of course, in the context of a broader national perspective, because some of the things that they want them passed are not projects and programs, they are legislative in nature, and you require the parliament as a whole to support you. For example, recently we had a Sugar Act sponsored by a member of parliament from Western Kenya, where sugar is mostly grown. But it required the votes of the member for the members from Northeastern Coast, where there is no sugar, and Central, to pass it. So the point is this: it is not true to say that a member of parliament does not need to articulate the interest of their people, because they are elected purposely for that. They are elected to articulate those interests and convey them either to the executive, to the legislature, and make sure that those interests at that local level are realized.
During your inauguration, when you took oath of office, your boss, the president, Dr. Ruto, said he felt he was a lone voice in the executive. From your interaction, 50 days in, is he still a lone voice? And perhaps you interact with him, he's your boss.
I really don't know.
Do you think you're fulfilling?
Do you think
you're fulfilling
how he's
that?
feeling?
Yeah.
Because again, that's not in my place. I wouldn't know how he's feeling at the moment. All I can say is that I'm doing my best to do my constitutional duty. That constitutional duty is being principal assistant to the president and also helping him in the delegated assignments that he has given me, and I'm doing my best. How he's feeling now, I cannot be, it's not in my place to tell you how happy he is or
do you think he's confident of what you're doing? Is he happy with what
I
with
think
your work?
so. I have no reason to doubt that he's confident.
You've been deputy president for only 50 days now. What would you say is the qualitative difference between you and the former deputy president, given that the operating environment hasn't changed?
It would be very improper for me to start comparing myself with my brother, the second deputy president.
The president has spoken very highly of your leadership and your contributions, as my colleague George Maringa here says. If the president feels that he has accomplished his key goals and decides not to run for re-election, would you consider running yourself? Do you believe that you have what it takes to run the country?
That question is an unfair question. Am I allowed to complain?
Why is that?
It is an unfair question because I have just been entrusted with a very serious and grave national responsibility. What is weighing in my mind now and what is really, really occupying me is the desire to discharge those obligations, because the expectations of the people of Kenya, the expectations of the president are so high. If I started occupying myself with ideas of what will happen, I don't know when, I'll be the most unsuitable person to be seated before you today.
Your Excellency, I want to rephrase Michelle's question regarding you and the former deputy president. Let's not even go with the qualitative differences. But clearly there are lessons you must have learned from Gachagwa's tenure in office. What lessons are those?
You know, my friend, you know, in leadership is defined by certain ethos and parameters. And I want to persuade you to allow me not to discuss my brother, the Honorable Rigathi Gachagua, because he's my friend. And you've not heard me bad-mouthing him anywhere before when he was in this office or even after he left office. So please spare me, because it is not right. It is wrong to start comparing myself with the predecessor or someone who occupied this office now or in the past, or a person who would occupy it in the future.
Are you being cautious, Your Excellency? The region you come from is very restive, and it's quite a significant, it has quite a significant portion in terms of votes. Are you being cautious now when I ask you the question of lessons you've learned? Are you being cautious not to antagonize the former deputy president?
I have no reason to antagonize anybody. For what?
Your Excellency.
Your Excellency, perhaps just to buttress on what John Kiore said, when it comes to lessons learned, many have said that the seat that you occupy now, the deputy presidency, has some sort of curse. They've called it the curse of the deputy presidency. And every individual who's held this seat has had some sort of, falling into political oblivion. Do you believe that you have the magic wand to change this so-called curse of the deputy?
I don't believe any seat is cursed. Let's start from there. Secondly, I don't think it is a priority to start thinking whether I will survive in this seat or not. As I have said, what is weighing in my mind, the same way when I became Interior Minister, and the North Rift was in that shape, Lamu, Boni was in that shape, and Northern Kenya was that shape. I told myself, including the passport crisis, I said, if I will last here for 1 year, I want to try my best and have these challenges under control. So for me, I cannot start now entertaining myself on what will happen to me, whether I'll succeed here or there. That's not for me to determine. It's beyond me. What is within my reach, what is within my control, is the focus to deliver on the job. As to whether I survive or what happens, that is not within my reach, and I cannot control what I cannot control.
VP, we need to move forward to the next topic, but I would like to end this with this question. The mountain which you seem to be avoiding is hostile ground right now, and not just the mountain. The government is struggling with its popularity as the president's principal assistant. How are you working to change that perception of Kenyans? And more so those who are...
Did you say that the mountain is restive?
Yes. The reception in Embu, for example, in Nyandarua the other day, residents refused to listen to the president's speech. In Nakuru County, at a burial, again, they did not want to listen to the president's
That is democracy. That's how democracy works.
Is that hostile ground to the government that you serve as deputy president now?
You see, there is a difference between running governments and being popular. Those are two different things. And for me, a leader should be least worried about popularity. The worry of a leader should be their pace and focus on transforming the lives of the people.
And do you think the lives of the people have been transformed?
A good leader is not necessarily one who is popular all the time. However, a good leader knows when to be popular.
Don't you think that popularity has gone down because Kenyans' lives
I really don't think so, because at the moment, President Ruto and his administration now in the midterm is not in their priority to look for popularity. There is no election taking place. The task of the government now at midterm is to track the pace of delivery, where there are gaps, seal those gaps, and just deliver on the commitments. The time will come when there will be popularity contests. And let me tell you, for avoidance of doubts, that is not President Ruto's worry. I also don't think that should be the worry of this administration. If we start worrying about popularity now, we'll lose it, time will elapse. We could even win the election next time, but we will not have delivered as we ought to deliver.
Your Excellency, and that transformation that you're talking about, Ashley, allow me, is what brings us into the next topic, which is about the economy, and Joel Chacha is going to lead that session.
Well, the government of the day boasts of a 2.8% inflation rate, which is a 17-year low. But the question here is on the shrinking disposable income, that is through what many may consider overtaxation. And the purchasing power, hence, is low. How are you working to ensure that there is money in the pockets of Kenyans?
Thank you. When President Ruto took over leadership of this country in 2022, the 5 or 6 macroeconomic indicators were not looking good. And I need to clarify now that I have this opportunity. Many people think when we project that time frame so that to show the distance we have covered, we are casting aspersions at the previous administration. That is not true. Kenya got to where it was in 2022 because of factors mainly beyond the control of President Uhuru Kenyatta, because the country's economy was shut down for nearly 2 years by COVID-19. No economic activity. And then, of course, the war in Ukraine, and which affected the global supply chain of wheat and other oil and foodstuffs, and many other factors. So when we refer to 2022, it is not political. It's just a fact. And in any case, that's the only way we can explain what we have done. Now, straight to your issue. The macroeconomic indicators were bad. The dollar was rising on a daily basis, 160. At one point, it approached 170. The price of fuel, the same. At one point, it approached 217 per liter for petrol, super. Then inflation was 9.6%. And then if you take the 6 basic food items, starting with unga, the main ones, again, the prices were much higher than they are today. Today, essential commodities 2 years later are down significantly. Just to give unga as an example, from 240, 250, 230 depending on the brand, to now something between 95 and 120 depending on the brand, maybe 120 something. Number two, the foreign exchange stability has been realized for more than a year now, from the high of 160 plus to now 127, 129 for some time. The same applies to the price of fuel, which is decreasing every day, every month, including last month when it went down by 4 shillings. Inflation again from 9.6 to 2.8%, the lowest in 17 months. Now, in 17 years. Now, that has not happened by magic or by chance. It has happened because of policy interventions, subsidizing production as opposed to consumption, the fertilizer subsidy, and so many other interventions in various sectors that has managed the macroeconomic situation. It has taken 2 years. But flashback to 2002 when President Kibaki took over, when we had similar situations at the exit of President Moi. It took President Kibaki 6 years to bring back macroeconomic stability. President Ruto has taken 2 years, by the grace of God. So the 2 years look a bit long, but in the context of what has happened in the past, I think this is a bit of a very good trial. What remains now is what you're asking me. The macroeconomic stability, for it to be felt by citizens, must be followed by microeconomic stability, which is improving household incomes, creating jobs, and so many other things that we are doing in the space of SMEs, in the space of the various sectors, including manufacturing and tourism. So, to answer your question, the macroeconomic transformation and the microeconomic transformation cannot be taken simultaneously. One must precede the other. Going forward, therefore, the remaining 3 years is the interventions. We're going to have interventions that will respond to the issues you say. Already those interventions have been operationalized. They are on course, creating jobs through the 3 major prongs, creating jobs at home, creating jobs online, creating jobs even overseas, and then also other interventions that will enable disposable incomes in the pockets of individual citizens.
But how would that really be achieved when the whole problem begins with our budgeting? For instance, despite the challenges faced in the fiscal year 2024-2025, your projections in the next fiscal year for 2025-2026, you're looking at having a budget of 4.25 trillion Kenya shillings, with the revenue, ordinary revenue, actually crossing the 3 trillion mark. that basically will translate either to more debt, because already we will record a 759 billion fiscal deficit, but at the same time, we are forced to actually impose now the taxation on Kenyans, because last year we only got 2.1 trillion in terms of ordinary revenue. So why this shift over ambition on ordinary revenue collections?
Again, in 2022, the fiscal deficit was more than 8.2% or thereabout. And that means the gap between revenue and expenditure. It was at 8.2%. This administration in 2 successive budgets has reduced it. Currently is at 4.3.
On paper, because of revenue shortfalls. That shifts towards the end of the fiscal year.
Yes.
And you are forced to bring a supplementary budget.
We are forced, but in all fairness, where the fiscal deficit is now is not where it was in 2022. And in fact, I am confident the Treasury will bring it further down this year. But more fundamentally, it is not in our priority of things to generate more revenue through perhaps more taxation, to answer you directly. What we are doing is that we are reviewing tax policy, because that's where you can still get more revenue, not by imposing new taxes or higher taxes, but by adjusting certain tax policy instruments that gives you more revenue. You heard the Minister for Finance and the National Treasury the other day explaining how the Treasury is entertaining a possibility. Of course, it has to go through public participation of even looking at VAT, what the VAT should be like, maybe try to bring it down, and other taxes as one of the 5 pillars this administration is putting in place to ensure that tax is a bit more accommodating, more people are bearing the burden of tax without necessarily compromising revenue. Number 2, Kenya's debt right now is in a better place than it was in 2022.
11.3 trillion is better?
It is better in the sense that, debt is calculated in 2 ways. First, as an absolute figure, which is what you're citing, but also as a percentage to GDP. And in other words, many countries...
At what percentage is it? Already at distress, 68%.
You call it distress, it's not. If it was, the IMF would have said so. And I'm sure the IMF has not said so.
Yeah, Your Excellency.
They are just warned us that we need to make sure that it doesn't enter into the red zone.
But 55% plus or minus 5 is what is allowed by our law.
The point is, it's not even about percentage also alone. Many countries, including developed countries, are highly indebted. The US, for example, the US debt is about almost 120% of GDP. Japan is 250% of GDP. 248, 250. So and many other countries. Singapore's debt also is in the hundreds. However, what we need to do, let's agree that what remains ahead is that our revenue generation measures must not lead to higher taxes. It's not a must. Number 2 is that the area of debt, we need to be careful so that Kenya does not enter into the unsustainability zone, and we are managing that.
DP, naomba kidogo, wakati ambapo tunazungumzia masuala ya uchumi, kuna wengi ambao wanahisi kwamba mnasema maneno mengi, maneno makubwa makubwa, lakini la msingi ni kwamba biashara nyingi ziko katika mazingira magumu. wengi wamefunga biashara zao, wengi wamelalamika kwamba hawawezi kuendeleza biashara zao kutokana na zile sheria ambazo zilizoko na zile sera ambazo zinatolewa na serikali. Labda unaweza kuwaeleza wale wanaokutazama leo hii ambao wameshindwa kuendelea na biashara zao, ni mikakati gani kama serikali mnaweka ili kuhakikisha kwamba hizi biashara zinaweza kuinuka na wanaweza kupata pesa mfukoni?
Asante sana. Ni kweli biashara nyingi zinapitia changamoto nyingi, na ni kweli wananchi wakiwemo wanabiashara wamelalamika na pia wametoa mapendekezo ya sheria ama sera ambazo wangetaka tuziangalie upya. Najua ya kwamba hivi sasa Wizara ya Uwekezaji na masuala ya industry ama viwanda inaongea na KEPSA. KEPSA ni ile private sector alliance ama kikundi cha wanabiashara katika sekta ya binafsi. Wanajadiliana kuhusu mambo mawili, na jana wamekuja hapa kunipatia mahali wamefika katika majadiliano. Ni leseni gani ambazo tunapaswa kuziangalia upya, na vile masuala ya ile levies ambazo zinatolewa na mashirika mbalimbali. Kwa hivyo swala hili la ugumu wa wanabiashara wetu ni swala ambalo tunaliangazia, tunajadiliana na wale ambao ni washikadau, na serikali iko tayari kutoa mwelekeo ama sera mpya za kuzingatia uboreshaji wa biashara. Ile jambo ambalo nimesema,
manake watu wanakwenda Krismasi hawana hela mfukoni, watakula nini sikukuu?
Unajua hayo majadiliano sio ya Krismasi, ni ya kurekebisha.
Januari kutakuwa na hela za karo zinazohitajika.
Pia hiyo mjadala sio wa maneno ya karo, ni wa kurekebisha idara zetu na ili biashara zetu zipanuke. Nataka niwahakikishie kwamba nimesema jana waziri wa viwanda na uwekezaji pamoja na wakilishi wa shirika hilo ambalo ni la wanabiashara wameniambia wako katika mjadala, na Januari nimeambia hao waniletee ile ripoti yao ili tuipitishe ama tuijadilie katika baraza la mawaziri. Kwa hivyo mwakani tutakuwa na mfumo mpya, sera mpya, sheria mpya za kuboresha biashara.
Lakini pia kuna wale ambao wanasema, nikimalizia, kuna wale ambao wanahisi kwamba hizi biashara kuna mazingira magumu, kwa sababu wale ambao wanapata mshahara, kwa mfano, zile pesa ambazo wao hutumia kwenda kwa hoteli, kwa mfano, kwenda kununua chakula, zimepungua kutokana na yale makato ya mishahara. Kwa hivyo wengi wanashikilia zile hela kidogo walizobakishwa nazo, ndio maana hizi biashara hazisongi mbele. Unasemaje kuhusiana na hili?
Unajua, nimesema ya kwamba Wizara ya Hazina ya Kitaifa imesema ya kwamba iko na mambo manne ambayo inataka kushughulikia ili kujaribu kusawazisha maneno ya kiuchumi na kuhakikisha wananchi wamepata nafuu ya kiuchumi katika household, yani katika individual level, sababu tumekuwa tukikabiliana na mambo ya kijumla. Sasa tunakabiliana na mambo ya kibinafsi, na kati ya hayo majadiliano kutakuwa na sera mpya za mambo ya ushuru na mambo ya kibiashara. Lakini la muhimu zaidi ni kwamba katika hayo majadiliano ni lazima tujue ya kwamba ile ushuru ambao unakatwa, kwa mfano katika mambo ya bima ya afya, unaweza kuwa unapunguza kidogo mshahara wako kama mtu ambaye ameajiriwa kazi, lakini ile bima ambayo ni ya kila mwananchi itapunguza zile arambe za kimatibabu. Kwa hivyo wewe labda pesa yako imepungua kidogo, lakini hizi arambe 5 ama 10 ulikuwa unaitwa kwa sababu uko na mtu kwa familia ako na shida ya figo, shida ya moyo, hizo harambee zikipungua, there is a net off. Kuna vile hiyo mkato imekunufaisha hata kwa njia zaidi kuliko vile ilikuwa, because
ile swala la naibu rais, lakini unapozungumzia masuala yote licha ufanisi huu wote, we've seen the president Dr. Ruto say we are proud that our sister country of Tanzania is now leading in our business engagements. The success of Tanzania is the success of East Africa. Businesses have been closing shop and going to neighboring countries. So you're speaking of this, and KEPSA has talked about it, that the government seems not to be listening to those who run businesses, that they're escaping to other countries.
I've just told you we are having a conversation with KEPSA. Why don't you call them after this interview?
We did speak a few weeks ago with
should have told you that they are engaging.
And he did say that, whereas that engagement is happening, it is not...
They have identified two areas. Yeah. One is the regulatory. They said there is multiple regulation, or what they are calling over-regulation. The second issue on the table is on taxation. We are a bit careful because the issue of taxation, we would rather have it in the broader tax policy and other fiscal issues that are being discussed and spearheaded by the National Treasury than just to take just that business community and handle their taxation issues without the context of looking at tax as a general issue.
I really need to ask a question on the tax regime, because today there has been an announcement that there is a task force that has been formed to get to the bottom of why businesses are closing down in the Republic of Kenya and relocating to other countries. Your Excellency, doesn't that sound absurd? Why do you need a task force to establish why businesses are closing when all you can blame is the taxation regime?
You need to, because this is something that has happened for the last 20 years. It has not happened this year. Just look at which organizations have left Kenya when? The last 25 years. And that's why the contribution of our manufacturing sector to GDP has dropped from as high as 12% many years ago to 7.5%.
On the pending bills.
So it's an accumulated problem, and I think there are no quick fixes. The best way to do it is to just analyze all the factors and bring recommendations that will last us another 40, 30 years.
The financial inadequacies being experienced in the country perhaps are as a result of the pending bills. More than 650 billion for the national government, 150 billion for county governments. But you're not budgeting for it. Do you promise Kenyans that as soon as the pending bills verification committee concludes its work, you're going to settle the pending bills?
We will implement the recommendations of the pending bills verification committee.
Thank you.
DP, tumebakisha dakika kidogo kabla ya kufunga, lakini hii leo kumekuwa na mabadiliko katika baraza la mawaziri, na kuna wengi ambao wanahisi kwamba the appointments that have been made seem like a harvest just 10 days after President William Ruto met retired President Uhuru Kenyatta, and all those appointed to the cabinet and board chairs seem to be from Mount Kenya. What is this about?
You know, the cabinet, appointments, dismissal, reassignments, if you look at Article 32, is the prerogative of one person, the president. So I'm sure the changes that the president has made have been made in exercise of that prerogative and to advance our country's national life in the weeks and months to come. I cannot directly associate themselves with the political developments, but also I have no reason to disassociate themselves from any political